Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video, just like I did for Survivors Borneo and the Australian Outback, around the 20th anniversary of the finale of Survivor Africa here, we're going to be doing a player ranking for the season. Here we're going to be ranking all 16 players from Survivor Africa based on how they played on this season. Again, this will not be a ranking of how I feel about them in the grand scheme of Survivor, as I do feel like that is a slightly different list. This is more of an assessment of how they played on this individual season. And with that, let's just jump right into it. At number 16, the worst player from Survivor Africa ends up being a pretty boring pick here, in that being the first boot in Diane Ognen. Now, for me, I will say this about Survivor Africa is I don't feel like there is an outright terrible player on Survivor Africa. Unlike previous seasons of the show, with like Borneo, we had someone like a BB who was a clear person on the bottom. With Survivor Australian Outback, Deb was a very clear person to put on the bottom. With Africa here, I don't feel like there's a clear person to put on the bottom, and because that just kind of ends up being Diane because she was the first boot. I actually don't think Diane played that poorly for being a first boot. I do feel like a lot of what caused Diane to go home was just her being Diane, this older age woman that was not in the greatest physical shape. And because she collapsed at the immunity challenge, they decided to vote her out. Now, I will say that Kim Johnson was someone that was older than her and still ends up surviving. So I think really, it's not like Diane came into this in an unwinnable position, but I do think she definitely had the cards stacked against her to begin with. Now, the one thing that I don't know whether or not to credit her with is Beangate, where obviously it's a very icky situation in the grand scheme of things, but I do think if it had been gameplay from Diane, I would actually consider it a pro for her. The fact that she was willing to throw Clarence under the bus so hard to the point where they're actually considering taking out Clarence, their biggest guy on the tribe, because of some drama that Diane stirred up. And I do think if that is actual gameplay from her, I do think that's actually kind of impressive. Now, do I think it was? To be honest, probably not. And because I feel like it's very tough to really credit her too much. But really, at the end of the day, there isn't much to really say about Diane, as, again, that was most of her storyline on the episode. So again, she's still the first boot. She's still someone that I think is probably the first boot on multiple seasons that she ends up playing on. So because of that, she ends up landing here at number 16. Now at number 15, this is going to be kind of boring as well, because it's actually the second boot of the season. Yeah, we do have Jessie Camacho. And Jessie's another one that, again, I just feel like we have very little to go off of. Obviously, Jessie was sick at the time. Throughout the entire season, she was pretty much sick. And because of that, she didn't really get to play the game in the way that you would expect her to. Now, again, I know a lot of people say that she has a lot of untapped potential, and I don't know if I fully agree with that, as, like, to be honest, I've never really got the greatest vibe gameplay-wise from Jessie Camacho. But even then, on this season, she just doesn't end up doing that much. She does survive a round, so that is something that I will give her credit for. She survives over Diane. Again, like, due to how sick she was, it did seem like she was pretty clearly going home here. But even then, even if she wasn't sick, I do think there's a chance she would have gone home anyway. Now, I do think it would have been closer, as I do feel like at that point, there might have been a debate between her and like Kim Johnson, who was like kind of ruining challenges for them. But again, I feel like Kim Johnson was more socially integrated, while we don't really see Jessie talking to many other people. Like, yes, there is this like woman's alliance that attempts to come together during her boot episode, but outside of that, like, we don't really see much from Jessie gameplay wise. And because I find it very tough to really credit her with anything that happens in the game, but because she did outlast Diane and also probably has more untapped potential, I did feel like she needed to land above her, so she is here at number 15. Now at number 14, we're going a bit off of the boot order, and we're skipping a person. At number 14, I do have Linda. This one's really close, because for me, the only reason Linda is lower than a certain other person that may have went out before her is because of the fact that Linda felt like she was less integrated within that older person alliance than that other person that we will talk about. For me, I always saw Linda as the person on the bottom of the old person alliance, where it did seem like Carl and Frank were very closely aligned. It did feel like Frank and T-Bird were very closely aligned, while we never really saw Linda being so closely aligned to any specific member there. She just felt like she was kind of a tag-along with the group, and also had some pretty poor social play, pretty openly with a lot of the younger members of the tribe. I just feel like there's very few positives to really say about Linda, outside the fact that she did survive that first vote. But when I don't really feel like she had that much potential moving forward, if she had survived, where again, I don't feel like she had that good of a position on that tribe to begin with, for me, Linda's just someone that I can't really justify putting too much higher, so she's here at number 14. Now at number 13, we're talking about the person that went home right before her, and that's Carl. I don't think Carl played a good game. I'm not saying Carl played a good game. Obviously, he's still here at number 13, but I do think at the end of the day, for me, when comparing Carl to Linda, I just feel like Carl was more integrated within that older person alliance. Again, I do feel like he had a very close relationship with Frank that we do clearly see on the show. We also see him actively strategizing a lot more than Linda ever did, where we do see that he's one of these people that is approaching Silas in order to try to get Silas to flip over to their side, which again, we never really see Linda doing anything of that sort. So for me, that was a major reason why Carl needed to be higher than Linda in my eyes. That being said, Carl still played pretty poorly. Obviously, he did have some really bad social play in terms of him bragging about the amount of cars he has, and just seemingly being looked at as kind of a joke from the younger players. He is obviously targeted first, so I do think you have to knock him a bit for that, and the fact that he was the person that the younger players did decide to go for right away. But again, because of his better positioning and him being more strategically active, I did think he was a better player than Linda in my eyes, so he's here at number 13. Now at number 12, we're actually making a big jump here to someone that made it into the middle section of the merge, but is also someone that I just feel like had no chance of ever winning the game and didn't really do much actively within the game beyond those first few rounds. So here at number 12, we do have Frank. Now, Frank is someone that I do think was very active early on in the game. Again, when Carl was there, like we do see him and Carl strategizing quite a bit and trying to pull over Silas, and he is a major instigator in that. He does very clearly take control of his tribe, and I do think he's actually pretty decently positioned within that older person alliance, where again, he has Carl and he has T-Bird as pretty strong alliance members at that point. However, I do feel like after the swap, Frank kind of just stops playing the game as hard. We kind of see T-Bird take control from that point forward, where T-Bird is the one that's leading a lot of the more strategic talk and is the one that's socially integrating within the other players. Frank kind of just becomes a follower at that point, just doing whatever T-Bird tells him to do. We do still see some really poor social play from him as well, where we see him getting into arguments with like Lex and Ethan over guns, and we obviously have his really hostile relationship with Brandon, where Brandon actively sabotages his own game just to ruin Frank's. And even by the time of Final Tribal, Brandon still hates Frank to the point where he asks his final jury question to bash on Frank. Like, Frank very clearly was a very bad social player, to the point where, like, I don't think Frank wins a jury vote. Like, I can't imagine a jury vote situation where Frank ends up winning the game. Obviously, he never gets Brandon's vote, but also, like, a lot of the women talked about how misogynistic he was, to the point where, like, I don't think a lot of the women are voting for him. Someone like Lex didn't like Frank out there, so it's like, who's really voting for him to end up giving him the win in most scenarios? Like, I really don't feel like Frank had a winning scenario while out there, and that's a major reason why he's all the way down here at number 12. Like, all the other things are very bad, but the main thing that puts him this low on the list is the fact that I just can't imagine him winning the game. So because of that, he does land here at number 12. Now at number 11, we're moving on to another player that did actually make it, again, a bit further into the game than what this placement would signify. This person made it to the merge, though not much beyond that. And here at number 11, we do have Clarence. Now, again, I've said this already in my retrospective. I do feel like Clarence is a player that would do a lot better in Modern Survivor. But because this is an assessment of how he played on Survivor Africa, I do feel like he has to be this low. Really, at the end of the day, I just think that this was not the cast for Clarence. I just feel like Clarence was never doing well with the cast that he was given here. I mean, yes, there were probably some racial stereotypes that did affect how he was able to play the game and people's perceptions of him, but I don't think he played well within that either. Pretty much right off the bat, even before the entire Beangate situation, he was already being ostracized by the Boron group, where, again, we already had, like, the Lex, Tom, and Ethan contingent that seemed to be very close and seemed to be pretty anti-him right from the beginning. Even later on, where he's talking to Jessie Camacho, who, again, really didn't have anyone in the game either. Even Jessie Camacho is very angry at Clarence and wasn't really willing to work with him. So, again, like, the fact that Clarence doesn't really get any allies on his original tribe, I do think that is a knock. At the swap, he does align with Silas, and does some decent work there. I do think Clarence is someone that I could see him flipping if they were able to make it to the merge with all 4 Samburu people, and through that could have possibly caused a tie, could have given Samburu the majority in a scenario. But even then, it's like, are they really taking Clarence to the end of the game? Probably not. Like, I really don't see any path for Clarence to make it deep in the game, largely because he didn't really have any major allies. Plus, also, it's very clear that by the time of the merge, Clarence was looked at as a really big physical threat to where they thought he was going to win all the challenges, and that's why he gets taken out at the first opportunity. To the point where, again, in a game that at this point, we had seen been played through tribal lines, both in Survivor Borneo and on Survivor Australian Outback, to where they come into the merge here on Africa, and the majority, which is Baran, ends up targeting one of their own due to him being a big physical threat. I do think that is also something you have to factor in here. I mean, I think for Clarence, there really isn't much positive to say about his game, which is a shame because I do think so much of the negatives that come from his game are perpetuated by some racial stereotypes that ended up affecting his game. But at the end of the day, it's like when really analyzing his game, there just isn't much to really say that is that positive, outside the fact that, again, at least he was looked at as a big threat, which makes you assume that he maybe would win a jury vote if he had gotten to the end, if he had somehow won a whole bunch of challenges and gotten to the end in some sort of scenario. He would be looked at as this underdog that got there, but even then, I don't even think that's a guarantee. But for me, it was enough to land him slightly above Frank. So he's here at number 11. Now at number 10, we're moving back to a pre-merge boot. Here at number 10, we do have Lindsey Richter. And Lindsey is someone that I think when taking her game at face value, it's a lot better than when you truly analyze it. Like, I do think Lindsey is someone that is really only this high because she had that core 4-person alliance, the younger people, that did have the ability to run the game up until the merge. Now, obviously they don't because of the swap, but if that had not happened, that group was probably going to make it to the merge pretty easily. Now, what happens at the merge? I think she probably gets taken out immediately after Silas, but there's a chance that we're looking at Lindsey being a pretty dominant figure for half of the season. And even within that core alliance, she's not positioned particularly poorly. I mean, she had a really good relationship with Kim Powers. She had a really good relationship with Silas. Maybe her relationship with Brandon wasn't the greatest, but even then it wasn't outright terrible. Like, she wasn't that terribly positioned there. However, I do think there are obviously knocks here. One, I can't imagine her winning a jury vote. She was just simply not liked out there. I do feel like against almost everybody, I feel like she has a tough time winning the game. But also, while, again, she was well-positioned within her group, I think outside of her group, she wasn't well-positioned. And she probably would have been taken out relatively early on. And if she wasn't taken out, she probably would have been dragged as a goat. So it's like, Lindsey is really simply this high because she at least had a core alliance. Again, people that we just talked about, Clarence didn't have a core alliance at all. Frank had a core alliance at one point, but spends a lot of the game outside of the majority and then very clearly has no chance of winning the game. Lindsey at least had a core alliance that would have been extremely dominant had it not been for the swap, which was something that they couldn't really predict at the time. Now, I will say that I also think she does a decent enough job after the swap at trying to get the votes onto Brandon. Now, I do think she gets screwed over by the fact that T-Bird and Frank very obviously flipped and Kim Johnson ends up leaking to the other Baran members about who has votes, but even then, like, I feel like she does a decent enough job. Like, I don't think she's an all-around terrible player, though, again, she does have some pretty bad social play at points. I mean, again, her berating the older players after they vote for her at the 4-4 vote, like, that's not great. She obviously just came off as annoying to a lot of the other players. She's not a great player, but I feel like the minor pros that she had were enough to land her here at number 10. Now at number 9, we're moving on to the final pre-merge player. Here we do have Silas. Now, I'll be honest, coming into this list, I thought Silas was going to be higher. I actually thought Silas was probably going to be somewhere in the 6 to 7 range. Because, again, Silas is someone that I think when you think about him, you think of him as this swap-screwed player. You think of him as this dominant figure that wasn't able to dominate because the swap screwed him over. But I think when you look at his game a lot more deeply, again, it is a deeply flawed game. Again, he does take control of his original tribe and would have dominated up until the merge if the swap didn't happen. He was very well positioned within that alliance as well, where he has very strong relationships with everyone, to where they all wanted to take him further into the game. He had a particularly strong relationship with Lindsey. Like, he had pretty good positioning there, to where I think if he makes it to the Final Four with that group, I think he more than likely makes it to the end, whether it's through his relationship with Lindsey or through winning out. Like, I do think he is decently positioned if they get to the end. The problem is that he almost all but guarantees that they won't make it to the end. Again, he is the leader of that alliance, in the way that they treat the older group completely isolates them. Obviously, we see that moment where he tries to micromanage what they're going to do at the Linda vote. And through that just pisses off that minority even more, because like he's so blatantly being see-through there in what he's trying to do. But again, like even if things had worked out without the swap there, he's in a position to where if Frank or T-Bird do make it to the merge, he's essentially relying on their votes to stay in the game. He needs their votes in order to get the majority at the merge, or he needs Clarence to still be there and for Clarence to flip, which is another situation that is not guaranteed. Like he is banking on, again, either Clarence flipping or these people that he very clearly ostracized at almost every opportunity to stick by him for seemingly no reason. And even if Clarence were to flip, again, like his side has the disadvantage to begin with, because his side does have all the people that have previous votes, where Silas, Lindsey, and Clarence all have previous votes on them at that point in the season. So it's like, there is no winning scenario here for Silas. Like, while Silas is a dominant figure, and I do give him credit for that, it's like what he does with that dominance is deeply flawed. And because of that, I can't really justify putting him much higher than number 9 here. Now number 8, and from this point on, it's essentially the final 9 minus Frank. So a lot of these people did make pretty deep runs, but at number 8 here, we do have the next person from the younger person alliance, and that is Brandon. Now, I'm surprised Brandon is this high, because I would have said coming into this ranking that he would have definitely been below Silas. Like, I didn't think Brandon would be this high on the list. And I will say that the main reason he is this high on the list is because I did actually think he played decently well in the first half of the game. We see him being one of the ones that is talking to the older players more so during the early portions of the game. We do see that during the swap. He is the person that is reaching out to Lex and to Kelly Goldsmith the most, to the point where they have a conversation between themselves where they talk about how much they like Brandon. He does come up with this strategy to try to get the votes pinned on him, and it does seem pretty effective up until the point where Kim Johnson blatantly tells the other group that Lindsey has the votes. Like, I do think Brandon plays pretty well for the first half of the game. The problem is that he ruins his game over his moral compass of not wanting to work with Frank, which again, like, as a person, I don't really have a problem with the move. For Brandon, as obviously a gay man, like for him to be seen working with a very clear homophobic presence, it's not a good look. And I get that entirely from Brandon. But when analyzing the game, this is a terrible move. Again, he is the sole vote that flips against his original group, siding with a group that he has almost no ties with. He only has a tie with Lex, and we see that he gets taken out largely because Ethan and Tom don't trust him because he flips, and which is the major problem of being a sole person to flip within the game. But also through that, he obviously ruins his relationships with his older alliance members as well, namely Kim Powers. Again, like, it is a really bad move, and it's one that, again, costs him the game. I do think if he sticks true to that original 5, he's in a pretty good spot where it's him and Kim Powers versus T-Bird and Frank, with Kelly Goldsmith essentially as the swing. And even if she isn't the swing, then you have a 2v2 and you can play it out from there. Like, he definitely would have been in a much better position than flipping to being 5th on a 5-person alliance, to where the majority of the people within that alliance don't trust him at all. Again, it's a really bad move, but again, I do give him a lot of credit for the things that he does in the first half of the game that I do think are very impressive. And because of that, he does still land here at number 8. Now, number 7, we have the other player that's outside of the top 6, because spoiler alert, the top 6 on the list are the top 6. So at number 7, we have Kelly Goldsmith, who I think plays an alright game, all things considered. I mean, Kelly Goldsmith is someone that I think was ahead of her time. I do think she seemed to have a more dynamic view of the game than what was typically seen on Survivor at this point. The fact that she was so willing to flip on Lex is something that we haven't really seen before in the post-merge game, to flip over to the other alliance. We hadn't seen that. Again, like, we could have seen it last season, where on Australian Outback, like, Jerry had the opportunity to flip over to the Kuchas, but didn't. Amber had the opportunity to flip over to the Kuchas and didn't. In Borneo, Sean and Kelly had opportunities to flip. They didn't. Here in Africa, Kelly Goldsmith flips. And it doesn't work out for her because Brandon flips back also. But I do think that shows that her level of gameplay was a bit above what was the standard at this point. That she definitely thought about the game more individualistically than what most people did at this time. Now, I do question a lot of the early moves in the game that she makes, where while she does side with the Lex, Tom, and Ethan group, she very clearly isn't that close to that group. Where again, she openly talks about not liking Lex. She talks about having no relationship with Ethan. So at that point, who is she really aligning with? I guess like Kim Johnson and Tom? It's like she clearly doesn't have that great of relationships on her initial tribe, which I do think is also a knock on her. But I do think she does some decent work post-swap, building relationships with Brandon and Kim Powers, which she ends up utilizing in the post-merge, to where Kim Powers and T-Bird are approaching Kelly to flip even before the Kelly-Lex situation even happened. Like, I do think she positions herself decently well in beginning sections of that merge. The problem is, one, obviously the Lex witch hunt happens, which, again, I think you can partially blame on her in the fact that she didn't have a better relationship with Lex to where Lex doesn't blame her. But also, I do think there is a lot of luck involved with that. But also, like, realistically, I don't really see an endgame for Kelly Goldsmith, which is the reason she's not higher on the list. Even if the witch hunt didn't happen, it's like, where's she really going? If she sticks with her original alliance, obviously Ethan, Tom, and Lex have the majority and are going to stay in the majority no matter what. If she does end up flipping, at that point, I guess, like, she can potentially become the swing vote between the old and the young groups. And maybe she wins final immunity and gets the 3. Maybe she can get to the end. But even then, is she getting the votes to win at that point, being this turncoat that voted out all of our original alliance members? Like, I don't really see a path to her winning. But I do think the level of self-interest that she showed within the game is very impressive to me. And I do think she is a player ahead of her time. So she's here at number 7. Now at number 6, we're moving on to the player that's in 6th place. So here we have Kim Powers, which I'll also say I'm very surprised Kim Powers is this high on the list. Kim Powers is someone that I came into the rewatch thinking nothing of her. I thought she was a nothing player, didn't really do anything in the game. But I think in retrospect, she actually plays decently well. Like, while I do still have the same issues with her that I do with all the other younger players, I do think she's still probably the best player of those younger players. I do think her and Brandon are very clearly the most socially able, to where they're the ones that aren't pissing off the older people, and Silas and Lindsey, who are the ones that get blamed for that. But also, I do feel like Kim Powers is decently active in the game as well, particularly at the merge. Like, at the merge, like, we really see it's her that is campaigning hard to Kelly to get Kelly to flip, and is the one that gets Kelly to eventually agree to doing so. Now, how much of that is Lex's own bad gameplay? I think a lot of it. But still, it's like Kim Powers is the one that campaigns to Kelly to get her to flip to begin with. Now, again, technically, it was given to her by T-Bird as a plan, but still, it's like she's the one that executes it. And again, I think if Brandon hadn't flipped, she could have been in a pretty decent spot to win the game. I do think if Brandon and Kim Powers get to the end of the game, I think Kim Powers has a decent shot there. I think if Kim Powers gets to the end against Kelly Goldsmith, I think she has a decent shot there. The problem is that obviously she didn't have the numbers. Even going back to the original younger person alliance, like, I do think if she gets to the end against Silas or Lindsey, I think there could be a bitter jury element to where Kim Powers ends up winning out there. Like, I do think she is probably the most likely winner from a jury vote standpoint of those younger players. Plus, it's the fact that I think she was probably the best positioned out of those younger players within the grand scheme of Samburu. To where I do think if Samburu had picked off the younger players one by one, I do think Kim Powers is the one that is the last one standing. So for me, again, I think she had decent positioning. I think she is a bit more active in the game than I used to give her credit for. Again, she tries to pull together this women's alliance with Kim Johnson by the time she ends up getting booted as well, which doesn't end up working. But I do think there is impressive work there from Kim Johnson, which is why she's here at number 6. Now number 5, and obviously this 5 here is the top 5, and I did have a pretty big debate over the placements here. I do feel like it was actually a lot tougher than I thought it was going to be, especially coming into this list. But I did end up sticking to my guns with the number 5 placement here, which ended up being Kim Johnson, obviously the runner-up of the season. And despite her making it further than 3 of the players we're going to be talking about in the top 4, I feel like there's a couple major knocks that keep her out of the top 4. Now, I will say that my overall opinion of her game did go up quite a bit during the rewatch. I do think overall, I think she is a bit more active in the game than I ever gave her credit for. I do think there are multiple points where she would have considered flipping against Tom and Lex had she gotten Ethan on board, which was probably never happening, which is probably the biggest downside of her game, is the fact that she is so loyal to Ethan to where she's never able to pull off any moves because Ethan isn't really willing to do anything. Now, at the same time, I'll also say that I don't think Kim Johnson wins the game even if she pulls off those moves. Like, I don't think Kim Johnson's ever winning the game, which I think is also partially due to the fact that she is this 58-year-old grandma, and through that didn't really have the natural respect from the jury to win a jury vote. But I do think she does some impressive work, being like the very clear swing vote for T-Bird to campaign to. And if she had been a more dynamic player, I do think that could have led to a lot more interesting of an endgame and her not getting into a position where she had to essentially win out from the final four on, which she does end up doing. She does end up winning from the final four on, which I do still consider a knock that she needs to win those final two immunity challenges, especially because both of them are very fluky wins. The final four challenge being one where she wins due to production getting the answer wrong for that piercing question. Then also at the final three, she has Ethan falling due to seeing someone else puke, and then you also have Lex being sick. So it's like both very fluky wins that I do think also knock her game down a bit for me. But again, like, I feel like she does very good work in bonding with Ethan. Like, while her greatest flaw in the game is being too loyal to Ethan to where she doesn't make the moves that she needs to make, at the same time, her best move is also aligning with Ethan at the right time to where Ethan does keep her in the game. Like, we do see that, like, Kim Johnson and Tom clearly don't have that great of an alliance. Kim Johnson and Lex seem to be fine, but it is Ethan that is keeping Kim Johnson within that majority alliance. And I do think at the end of the day, that is probably Kim Johnson's best move the entire season, is building such a strong bond with Ethan. Now, if only, again, she was willing to flip on Ethan in order to make her own way to the end, I do think that would have led to her having a better chance at winning the game. But still, considering the era of Survivor that we're in, I actually don't think Kim Johnson played that bad of a game, despite her very massive flaws that are there. But then again, everyone has very massive flaws. The main thing that's keeping her outside the top four for me at this point is the fact that I don't see her winning the game, which again, a lot of that can be due to just the natural perception of her coming into the game. But overall though, for me, I did feel like number 5 was the spot that I had to land her in. Now number 4, and this was tough for me because I came into this list thinking that the top 3 were going to be the big 3 of the season, Ethan, Lex, and Tom. However, after a bit more analyzing, I did decide to put at number 4, we do have Big Tom. And a lot of the reason for this is because something I realized during my rewatch is that we really don't see a lot of Big Tom's game. Like, while Big Tom was part of the Big 3 alliance, again, with Lex and Ethan, two people who I will give a lot of credit for later on in the video, in how the game plays out, we don't get a lot of Tom. Really, a lot of the time, we're getting Tom's opinions on things through the perspective of other players. Like, when Lex approaches Ethan to join the alliance, we already know that Lex and Tom are aligned, but that is through Lex telling us. We do see later on that Ethan and Tom want to get rid of Brandon, but we're hearing that from Ethan saying that him and Big Tom want to get rid of Brandon. It's like we very rarely see Big Tom's actual perspective on the game. And because that becomes very tough for me to truly assess his game, because at that point, how much of it was really game? I think another thing is the fact that I don't know if Big Tom wins at the end. That is a big question mark for me, where I don't know how good his winning chances are. Like, I don't know who wins in an Ethan Big Tom final 2. If I had a clear answer, maybe I would put Big Tom higher. But because I don't really know, I do feel like it becomes a lot harder to also put Big Tom higher on the list because of that. Really, Big Tom, Lex, and Ethan, again, played very similar games. They were all in the majority alliance the entire way through. They remained relatively loyal the entire way through. Big Tom obviously does his Big Tom thing of throwing Lex under a bus without actually being able to flip on Lex, which gets back to Lex, which ends up burning Big Tom later down the road, which all this is pretty poor gameplay, though obviously it also does show a bit of individualistic gameplay from Tom, though not enough to really give him too much credit for. Really, for me, again, like the main reason Tom's not higher on the list is because I do feel like we just lack more information on Big Tom's game that we do have with the other 3 players that we will be talking about. So for me, Big Tom ends up landing here at number 4. Now number 3, we're on to the final player from the Samburu tribe, someone that I do have a very high opinion of. At number 3, we do have T-Bird. And I love the way that T-Bird plays the game on this season. Like, while she does start off pretty slow, she does start off in that old person alliance and becomes probably the least prominent member of that alliance. Like, while again, she has a good relationship with Frank, has a decent relationship with Linda, like, I don't feel like she is that active within that group. Again, we see a lot of Carl and Frank doing a lot of the work there. But once the swap happens, I do think she does a lot of good work. She does do a lot of bonding with Ethan and Kim Johnson in order to flip against Silas. Is a major reason why Silas goes home. Is a major reason why Lindsey goes home through her leaking the information to Kim Johnson that ends up getting back to the old Barons. At the merge, like, despite her not being in the main majority, Lex seems to have a lot of trust in her. To the point where, like, despite her being the vote for Lex, Lex believes that T-Bird wasn't the vote for him, which I think is very indicative of her being a really good social player. We also have her coming up with the plan to flip Kelly on Lex, and that does almost come through, where again, if it wasn't for Brandon, she pulls off the first ever post-merge flip in the game. And then from that point on, she's in the minority because, again, Brandon messed everything up, but she doesn't stop trying. Now, I think the one thing I will give her a massive knock for is that she doesn't try at the final 8, where she does become complacent in voting out Brandon. I do wish that she would have tried to pull Brandon back in, tried to pull off a plurality vote. That would have been really cool. But after Brandon goes, like, she does some pretty good work trying to build this all-women's alliance with Kim Johnson. She does really good work on Kim Johnson, to where Kim Johnson goes back to Ethan, actually considering the things that T-Bird tells her. Like, T-Bird does good work. It never works out for her, largely because, again, this is older school Survivor where people aren't willing to make these moves at this point. But I do think if this was a modern season, I think T-Bird probably wins the season, to be honest. I do think T-Bird would be able to pull over a Kim Johnson and an Ethan in a modern landscape of the show. But because this is an older show that is so reliant on loyalty, I do feel like that did harm T-Bird's ability within the game. But I do think a lot of the work that she does is good work. Like, I do think she makes a lot of correct calls in the game of what moves to make. Like, she is one that does cause a major rift between Lex and Tom in the end game. And while, again, it doesn't end up affecting her that much, I think in a modern season it probably would. I just feel like T-Bird's, again, a player that's ahead of her time. I do feel like in Survivor Africa it probably wasn't as effective as it could have been, but I do feel like on most other modern seasons it would probably work. Now, another thing I will give T-Bird a lot of credit for is I also think that T-Bird probably wins a jury vote in most scenarios. Like, I do think T-Bird probably wins the game if she's up against a lot of the people within the game. I think she gets the Samburu votes, plus also Kelly in most scenarios. And I do think T-Bird just overall is a very good player at this point in the show. But again, has those flaws of her not really being able to ever execute on the plans that she comes up with. So because of that, she does land here at number 3. And now at number 2, and the top 2 should have been obvious coming into the video. I think it was pretty obvious. Number 1, number 2 were going to be Ethan and Lex. The question was always going to be which one is which. And I will say that I always thought Lex was going to be number 1. Lex was always going to be number 1 for me coming into this video until the rewatch. And through that, I have decided to put Lex here at number 2. And again, like, Lex is a dominant figure in the game. He is someone that dominates, especially the end portion of the game. Like, he is very well positioned earlier on in the game, where he is very clearly the center of the Baron tribe, where he is closer to people like an Ethan and a Tom that allows him to have the power structure that he has. Post-swap, he very clearly comes off as the leader of that old Baron group and is really the one making a lot of the decisions there. And then post-merge, like, he clearly becomes the leader of the majority alliance that ends up running their way to the end. The problem is that, again, like, I feel like the way he handles his dominance is very flawed. The way he treats people along the way is not particularly great. Again, the way that he handles Kelly Goldsmith is terrible. The way he handles Clarence is terrible. The way he handles Big Tom is pretty terrible. Again, Lex has always been this person that's played a very hypocritical game in my eyes, of being this very game-savvy player, but one that doesn't admit that he's game-savvy and tries to still go the honorable route. And whenever he does that, it ends up causing some pretty poor gameplay in my eyes. With him going up to Clarence and telling Clarence he's going home. With him going to Kelly Goldsmith and pretty much telling her that she's out of the alliance. And picking a fight with Tom over the information that T-Bird ends up telling him. Like, it's all not great. Now, beyond that, again, I think he does some really good work. He is obviously, again, a major power figure within that majority alliance. He does pull over Brandon, that allows him to stay at the final 9 vote. Now, again, I would knock him for not being able to keep Brandon around for longer. But again, I do think a lot of his game is pretty impressive, but those knocks are pretty bad knocks. And when in comparison to Ethan, who, spoiler, is number 1, I do think the major thing for me is positioning. I just feel like Ethan was much better positioned in the game than Lex. To the point of the end game here where, again, Ethan was always going to the end by the time of the Final Four, while with Lex, he needed either himself or Ethan to win, where Tom and Kim Johnson were both not taking him to the end. It's like, I do think his positioning was just slightly worse. And because of all the other flaws in his game, for me, he does end up landing here at number 2. Now at number 1, the best player from Survivor Africa. Obviously, I mentioned it already, it is Ethan, the winner of the season. Now, again, for the longest time, I would have had him at number 2. I do think for the longest time, I would have had Lex at number 1. However, on the rewatch, my opinion of Ethan's game did go up quite a bit. Again, I still have the same flaws. He is still too loyal to Lex, to the point where if he takes Lex to the end, I do think Lex ends up beating him. I do also think that he struggles with building relationships outside of his core group. Again, he was very good at building relationships with Lex, Tom, and Kim Johnson, but I do think when it comes to building relationships with people like Brandon and people like Kelly Goldsmith and people like Kim Powers, like he very much struggled in that. I also feel like he's a very passive player, to the point where, again, he is in that big 3 alliance, but largely because Lex approaches him, not because Ethan actually does anything to join the alliance, on his own right. And I feel like that really just sums up Ethan's game for a lot of it, is that he is very passive in the game. But at the same time, his positioning is so masterful without him even really trying. And the fact that he gets, again, to the Final Four in a position where everyone is taking him to the end is insane. And in a position where he obviously beats Kim Johnson. I think he has a good chance against Tom. He obviously loses against Lex, but again, he's still getting to the final 2. Very good positioning there. Ethan's also someone that was never really in danger of going home. He never gets a vote for him the entire season. Was very safe the entire way through. Also does a very good job at managing Kim Johnson within the game that allows him to get into that perfect Final Four situation where, again, Kim Johnson wanted to flip multiple times in the game, but he stops her from flipping, allowing him to get to the end with all of his allies. I think Ethan does a lot of really good work on this season. Plus, also, I will give him a lot more strategic credit than I used to. Again, like, I always gave him credit for the Silas move. I think him throwing the immunity challenge to get rid of Silas, really great move there. But also, again, like, he turns the tables on Brandon as well. Like, him and Tom go behind Lex's back to get rid of Brandon. And I do think that's also another move I would give Ethan credit for. Like, while I do have issues with Ethan's game, I do think the pros do very much outweigh the cons for me, to where, again, like, despite him losing to Lex, if he gets to the end of the game with him in a position where he probably was going to take Lex to the end, he probably ends up winning almost every other scenario and was definitely the most guaranteed person to make it to the end. So because of that, for me, Ethan lands here at number 1. And there we go. That is my player ranking for Survivor Africa. Now, obviously, moving forward, I'll do very similar videos to this for the other anniversaries for Survivor seasons moving forward. I have also thought about going backwards in time with these player rankings and going from IOI and back to kind of catch back up to where these player rankings are, so I can do all of these player rankings at some point. So that's another possibility moving down the road. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.